My name is Tony Bishop. I'm the owner of Connexa Search Group. We're a recruiting firm that specializes in diagnostic testing. We also do biotech and life science industries. Diagnostics is 90% of our business. The reason that I'm doing this podcast today is I want to share with you guys one of the most common reasons that small early stage companies struggle, and a lot of them never make it. A lot of them have to close the doors because of this one issue, and that is having a effective reimbursement strategy or not having an effective reimbursement strategy. That is probably the most common thing that we see. And we work with 15 to 20 early stage companies every year. And so over 2 decades, we have seen this time and time again. And so I want to get the word out to you guys and try to catch you early in the process so that you can develop your company around a reimbursement strategy that is powerful, that will help your company be successful. Obviously, I have a vested interest in this. I recruit in this space. If I can help you build a successful company by giving you some advice or lining you up with a consultant that can help you, then obviously I stand to gain as well because you will hire people from us, is my hopes. But anyway, this is information that I just really felt compelled to get to you guys so that you could act on it and make sure that you have a successful reimbursement strategy and ultimately will lead to a very successful company. So over the years, we have placed a lot of people in managed care, revenue cycle. So we know a lot of managed care experts. We've placed a lot of managed care candidates across the United States over the years. One person who really stood out to us during this process of getting to know managed care was a gentleman by the name of John Napier. And John is a gentleman who has basically studied reimbursement, has really analyzed it, understands it probably more so than anybody we've worked with. And then over the years, what he's done, he used to work for companies, small and large companies, but then he realized he could have a bigger impact helping early stage companies start off the right way. The sooner you can start, the better off you're going to be. And so John has formed a company and he's a consultant in this space and he can help you get on the right track. He's got an incredible team. I'm going to let John introduce his team and we'll go through some questions and some answers that will help you figure out how to formulate an effective strategy. So John, welcome, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Tony, and thanks for having me today. I appreciate the time. In terms of what we do here with our consulting team is we look at products and services according to the new rules of reimbursement. So as most people should know, reimbursement is changing, and it's changing dramatically here in the United States. So what's happening with the payer mentality is that they are looking at products and services based on their performance. Does it improve clinical outcomes? Does it save money? And diagnostics can fall into that category. And what you have to do is you have to look at diagnostics in terms of there are the commodity-based diagnostics, and we all know what a commodity is. And then there are the performance-based diagnostics, the diagnostics which can actually lead to clinical decisions which are truly able to be tracked as improving outcomes and tracked as improving savings. And so this is all a part of value-based purchasing and value-based payment and the advanced payment models which are now available to participate in for not only the payers and the hospitals and the physicians, but also providers like laboratories. They have the ability to negotiate portions of gain share or P4P performance bonuses that they contribute to. And so what we do on our side is we look at a platform for its actual performance. And I do that with a couple of very key people, very special people. The first one is a fellow by the name of Dr. Ken Thorpe. Ken is an economist. He is the chair of the Health Policy Department at Emory University. He was Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services for the Clinton administration, and he is a co-author of the PPACA, or Obamacare as it's commonly known. And that's where these reimbursement changes lie, is in that legislation. That legislation basically says that We want to move away from volume-based purchasing mentalities to value-based purchasing mentalities. And that is something that moves forward with the Trump administration, just to let everybody know. The Trump administration, with the Azar as the person who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, has tripled down on value-based care. This is now omnipresent throughout the entire system. It includes VA, TRICARE, DOD, and really any place that a claim is generated and submitted to an insurance company for reimbursement. Value-based care plays, whether it be commercial or certainly on the federal side. So Dr. Thorpe is an expert on the legislation, and he's also an expert on the economics, and he creates the health economic models which demonstrate performance related to the mandates or related to what is termed as metric performance. On the clinical side, on the clinical and scientific side, we have Dr. Alexander Porter. Alex is a thoracic surgeon by training, and he is the person who helps to develop the Global Value Dossier. And the Global Value Dossier is one of the prime proof sources that are required by the payors, whether it be on the federal side or the commercial side, for demonstration of scientific and clinical validity. So Alex creates those particular types of proof sources in the appropriate format, because format matters. Ken creates the health economic modeling, and they both contribute to the utilization dossier as well. So you need 3 different documents: Global Value Dossier, which is your scientific and clinical validity, your utility validity, and your health economic model that includes the cascading impact on gain share and P4P. Does that make sense?
Yes, John. Hey, great information. Very, you can tell you know this stuff inside and out. Very detailed. Now, let me take it back a little more basic because a lot of our clients are going to be and maybe technical founders, somebody who's developed a test, and maybe a PhD or an MD, or just an entrepreneur who started a new company. And so they've been really focusing on the technology and getting the test out and working that piece. And now they feel like they really have something and they're ready to introduce it to the market. And this is where I wanted to kind of get some of your input, because I know you have, you're like us, you get to see a lot of different companies and you've worked for some of these companies. Help them out as far as, because obviously they want to build a company and be successful. So what do you see as the most common mistakes that companies make that maybe you could help them avoid?
Well, I think the most common situation is it's actually kind of a parallel or dual issue. The first and issue is that they wait until too late for reimbursement activities to start. They have a tendency to follow what is called the demonstratable demand model, and that's the old pre-Obamacare mentality. And what that means is that they develop a test, they validate that test, and then they send reps out into the field to try to promote that test and submit claims to the payors as an out-of-network provider. This is actually causing them harm. It'll result in an experimental and investigational label, and it'll create a barrier to entry as it relates to their ability to develop medical policy and reimbursement. So the starting reimbursement too late is a major factor. The other factor is failing to recognize that in order to develop medical policy and develop reimbursement structures, you have to develop applicable proof sources. Again, Global Value Dossier, Utility Dossier, and the Health Economic Model. These are the required proof sources that you would present to a MedTech committee to prove your position in terms of your performance-based test and create medical policy, create reimbursement, and more importantly, establish a steerage mechanism for patients that your test is designed to assist with, for those patients to be steered to your platform.
Okay. Now, John, when you say, because I know a lot of companies in the past have done the, they go create the demand and then they kind of force, I suppose, the payors to adopt or to reimburse them. And that's, I suppose, I can think of some companies that 10 years ago started that and had success.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying nowadays, if you do that, that actually is a detriment to getting coverage.
It is. It is. Essentially what you're doing is you're pressing tests through the system which have not been validated and approved by the organization. Under those circumstances, what you have is you're an out-of-network provider submitting out-of-network claims. Under those, within that scenario, that is what is termed as network leakage, and the payers lose money on those types of situations. They first and foremost want to mitigate any risk against a diagnostic platform which has not been validated and approved for medical policy. They don't know whether or not your test works and whether or not your test can actually improve care, or is it possible that it's doing some sort of harm? So they have to put in that risk mitigation component right on the front end. So that's one of the barriers that they want to make sure that they're saving themselves or providing themselves, in that the test should do no harm. The second thing is the test shouldn't actually have leakage in the network. In other words, physicians, hospitals, any particular applicable reference source, they should be referring patients to in-network providers, both from the standpoint of the risk mitigation, in other words, they've been approved, and from the standpoint of the financial impact that it has on all of those people, whether it be payers or providers. So if you continue on a demonstrable demand model approach, what you're actually doing is butting up against the rules of the payers and the rules of how reimbursement now works. Again, this is the Obamacare reality. This is value-based purchasing. Previous to Obamacare, let's say the Bush administration and before, those types of purchasing behaviors were based on volume, high discount, high volume scenarios. That doesn't apply anymore. The payers are purchasing outcomes. And so they have to make sure that these physicians and these hospitals are referring approved in-network providers. And if they don't, in other words, if the physician goes out of network, the physician is convinced by a rep that he or she should go ahead and submit something which is absolutely not approved and absolutely going to be out of network, then the physician and the hospitals, whoever the referral source may be, can be penalized. And there's ample evidence out there that payers are penalizing non-compliant providers. And the penalties include a reduction in the fee schedules that the providers have negotiated, and up to being fired from networks. So you've got to make sure that you follow the current set of rules. The current set of rules says validate, get the policy, and move it forward.
Okay, great. Now, all right, so back to CEO, small company. Now I have a test that I think is pretty unique. I understand that I have got to go value-based. What's the next step? What do I do from here?
Well, let's first talk about how CEOs are often misled as it relates to, do I go LDT, laboratory developed test, or do I go through the FDA and try to get a 510 through predicate utilization? Okay. The fact is that the FDA approach, while it may be beneficial from an overall, let's just say, market marquee value, it does not replace the requirements for you to create the global value dossier, the utility dossier, the health economic model, and go to the payers to establish policy. It's just an added front end step, which usually adds quite a huge expense and a long time to do it, when you can go the LDT route and get everything done in the way that I'm describing. So making sure that you do these things according to good business strategies is really what makes the startup or the lab that's out there that has a test that is stagnated, or that has a test that has been incorrectly positioned in the marketplace. These two apply. So with it all, the approach is such that what we're saying to the provider, the diagnostic platform, is if you believe you have a test that is improving clinical outcomes and savings, then it is applicable for value-based positioning.
Okay, and then you're saying the difference between LDT and FDA. I mean, I suppose the FDA route is just it's gonna cost you a lot of money, take a lot of time, and may not be. I suppose if you think it's the path to help you get reimbursed, that's not the thought process. Is
Right,
not
right.
correct.
That's correct. FDA
Okay.
approval does not automatically beget medical policy.
Okay. And
Medical
then
policy must still be developed in order to develop the reimbursement structures.
okay, and then LDT tests I know are becoming more I suppose following certain FDA guidelines, I suppose.
Correct. Right.
There's
Right.
some uh, so I suppose the route of doing LDT is not a
It's not
bad route.
necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily absolutely mandatory. There is a movement. There's a lot of discussion in the marketplace that FDA is going to oversee LDTs. Under those circumstances, if that were to ever happen, current LDTs would be grandfathered in, and the requirements of value dossiers and economic models would still be a requirement. Again, when you get an FDA approval, the FDA approval is simply saying we've reviewed this for safety, and the real issue is there true clinical efficacy and is there medical policy? Medical policy is what drives reimbursement, and that's what all laboratories must do is create for their tests medical policy and reimbursement structures.
Okay. All right. So let's say that I've now decided that I've chosen either LDT, FDA, whatever it may be for my new test. What is the next step then? What would, as a CEO of a company, you made that decision. Now what do you do?
Well, now you've got to start to create your strategy and the tactics that are going to support that strategy for the development of medical policy and for the correct positioning of your test. And the key here is that if you believe you have a high performance test, and folks like myself and Dr. Thorpe and Dr. Porter agree with that, is that you avoid positioning your test as a commodity based transactional fee for service diagnostic platform. That means that you are a slave to the fee for service or the fee schedules. Under those circumstances, if you have this performance based test, you can position your test for 3 revenue opportunities, 3 streams of revenue. Under commodity, you have a single stream of revenue. There's a fee schedule, you have contract, you submit a clean claim, and you're paid for that test. Under the value-based approach or pay for performance approach, what you do is you're paid for that test under a fee schedule. So you have that patient encounter, the fee schedule pays you, reimburses you for that test. But if you can demonstrate that your test is improving outcomes and generating savings, you can also negotiate for a portion of those savings that you generated, with the exception of the Department of Defense, who doesn't share with anybody. But in all other cases, if you're generating savings and it's due to your diagnostic platform, and you demonstrated it through proof sourcing, then you can negotiate a portion of those savings which are being generated. So that's your second source of revenue. The third source of revenue is under this value-based scenario, which I'm describing, where there's been a validated test. It's been positioned as a value-based or performance diagnostic. That data, which is generated from the patient encounters, is now new and unique. And you can position with payors or applicable providers to have rights to that data so you can capture, stratify, de-identify, and monetize that data. And that's the third opportunity as it relates to revenue generation under these new rules.
Okay, hey, so that's a significant difference then. So versus being a commodity test, and now I have an opportunity to get revenue from 3 different streams, which could have a major impact on a startup company. Now, let me ask you this: so when we talk about the types of tests that would be value based, I mean, obviously that doesn't apply to basic chem profiles, glucose, BUN testing.
Right.
Can you give us an idea of like what types of tests, or is it too complex to give us just maybe a broad view of?
Actually, sure. You can look at things like a molecular diagnostic test, proteomic, some sort of biomarker that clearly helps to stratify a population and allows for a physician to make a specific clinical decision, which drives positive outcomes. And of course, under those circumstances, begets savings because the physician is actually taking a sniper shot rather than going at the patient with a shotgun blast. So that sniper shot under a molecular diagnostic risk stratification, let's just say for prostate cancer as an example, allows for a mechanism which the payer and the provider can track improved outcomes and track savings. And those are the types of tests that the payers are seeking. The payers are seeking forward-thinking providers who are coming to the table and who understand what the payers' metric performance requirements are, or they even understand what the physician's metric performance requirements or the hospital's metric performance requirements are. And you are contributing to improving their metric performance. That allows the payers, hospitals, physicians to improve their market share, to improve their bonus opportunities, to mitigate their risk against penalty. You participate in that, but you have to participate based on applicable proof sourcing to make sure that everybody is comfortable with the decisions that are being made and that all of the anticipated outcomes can be tracked.
Okay, so the payers see this as a way for them to save money if they're treating patients earlier in the process, and it's a proactive approach. Is that kind of the big picture piece of it?
Yeah, they look for the predictive, preventive type diagnostic platforms, which allow them to be proactive. And under those circumstances, if you look at a Medicare Advantage payer, virtually every payer has some sort of Medicare Advantage population. So we'll just use Humana as an example. Well, Humana has those patients, which allows them, if they demonstrate improved outcomes and savings, Humana is bonused by the federal government. And these bonuses are significant. And so what you can do is if you're helping Humana to improve their bonus opportunities, you can negotiate portions of the savings which you've generated on behalf of Humana. So they're incentivized to seek, validate, and embed diagnostic platforms which improve outcomes and savings.
Now, are you saying that part of that, if I'm a company that has a test that Humana is getting a bonus back from the federal government, are you saying that part of your service is to help some of that bonus come back to your clients?
Right. So here's that's the key. That's probably the secret sauce. We create these proof sources. We come in and we help you to validate the test in terms of this is a performance-based diagnostic platform. Then we help you to reposition or to position initially the test with the payers. I'll pursue I'll negotiate on behalf of the diagnostic platform of the provider a value-based agreement which encompasses all of the things that I just talked about, and will assist with that type of interaction because as is the norm, most startups don't understand the importance of the managed care contract, the importance of the payer relationship. That's just a basic thing, but it's even more complex when the relationship can include these value-based incentive opportunities and the opportunity to capture and monetize data. It's all part and parcel of the legislation and what's been implemented over the last 8-9 years since the PPACA was brought into play back in 2010. So with all of this, we do assist with that entire process because the vast majority of managed care people are still operating under a commodity-based or transactional fee-for-service-based mentality. They've yet to understand and embrace and incorporate the opportunities which are part and parcel of federal law. And that's what we do. And again, going back to Dr. Thorpe as an example, Dr. Thorpe is one of the co-authors of the legislation. That's why we know what we're doing as it relates to these things that I'm talking about, because I've got one of the authors of the legislation who is part of my team. So we know how the law works, and we use the law and the rule of law to the advantage of everybody, because there's plenty of money to be made legally. And that's what we're doing. We're just following the rule of law.
Yeah, and that's great. Hey, one thing that I want to add here too is that we do place managed care people across the United States. And the reason that we have partnered with John and his team is because nobody else that we place, or very few people, I can't think of anybody, actually has this in-depth knowledge. And I think because people get locked into what they're used to, and then they just keep doing more of the same thing. And so I think, for all you CEOs and executives, these small companies, I mean, be careful on who you bring in to help you, and that if you hire a full-time person, if they really don't understand what's going on currently, then they'll just get you more of what hasn't worked in the past. So you have to be careful with that. And I was going to ask John that question, like, hey, how do you, when do you bring in somebody like John? What part, of the process? So now let's kind of go back, and we've determined that we have an LDT. We've got a value-based test. We know it's a pretty unique test. Now we're talking to somebody like John, and he agrees that it's a value-based test. John, what would be your next step here, as far as, I suppose, is there clinical trials, and what's the proof source? I mean, how do they go out and prove that this test is a value-based test, and go from there?
Well, the earlier that you bring on a person or a team like mine, the better. Once you've essentially, if you're let's say the inventor of the test, and you've decided that indeed you're going to commercialize the test, that's when you need to start working on the reimbursement and the data collection efforts. So we assist you in terms of creating the studies. We assist you in terms of creating the data collection efforts for utilization. We assist you in terms of identifying and all of the applicable resources that are going to allow you to create these mandatory proof sources. And you can't start early enough. We've seen laboratories out there who start way too late, and they try to monetize through the bringing the sales reps on board too early and selling into a system where there's no policy, and they burn through the cash. And it's just because the system is telling them not to do it. It's not because the test is bad per se, or the people from the C-suite on down are not good people. They are. It's just the system has changed, and you have to adjust the system. So as soon as you decide that you're going to monetize a test, that's when you bring on a group of our folks, because the data collection opportunity also includes specifics that you should be focusing on as it relates to the data that you want collected. Our team recently did an effort with a startup that is looking at launching in 2020, and we helped them to redesign some of their studies because it allowed us to add questions or add data collection points to the study, which would enhance their ability to establish medical policy and expedite reimbursement when the studies were done.
Okay, great. Now, as far as studies, it sounds like this could take a long time. I know people are probably eager to start generating revenue. Can you tell me just kind of big picture? I mean, how long does a study take? And how expensive are these things?
Well, expense varies. So, studies can be expensive. It's just dependent upon what type of data you're starting off with. Now, data is unique in terms of scientific and clinical validation. What you're looking for is 2 to 3 peer-reviewed studies with statistically significant populations. We can assist with expediting those particular types of studies, and more importantly, doing a deep dive on all of the available studies worldwide. Because if your studies meet the protocols or the norms of data collection in China that you would expect here in the United States, you can use those studies. It's just making sure that you're positioning the studies correctly and putting them in the correct format as it relates to your global value dossier. So it depends is really the answer. Depends on where any given entity is in terms of its own evolution.
Okay. All right. So and that's something you and your team will help them design a study that's effective. So after the study's done, is that when you start going to the payers then and presenting the information?
I'm actually working with the payers early on. I'm working with applicable provider channels early on. It may be a hospital with a cancer unit in terms of the major cancer networks out there. It may be the VA or TRICARE or any other type of platform which aligns. And we develop multiple sites in order to drive statistically significant populations in the shortest time possible, and we do it under a very restrictive atmosphere to make sure that the quality is there and that everything that we produce and therefore deliver to the payers will meet and or exceed any standards that they have.
Okay. Hey, and John, one other question around the studies. I mean, do you guys actually, I mean, does the company need to hire a clinical trials person to coordinate all the data, or is that part of your service? Is that just a different service that they need to hire on?
Well, we'll work with the service of their choice, or we'll do it as part of our service as well. So, and that includes the FDA. We can walk companies through the FDA process as a consulting firm, or we can bring the team to bear and work with anybody that they've chosen. So we're flexible in that scenario because we want to make sure that the customer, the client, the laboratory itself is comfortable with their own team. And so we'll work with an internal team or an external team that they've chosen, or we'll bring one to bear.
So you could do this turnkey, though. Is that I suppose that's a service you guys offer?
Absolutely. We're happy to do that. It just depends on, really for us, we look at the test and we say, is it going to be a high performance platform? That's where our specialty lies. We don't pursue commodity type opportunities. We pursue those opportunities which are value based in nature, high performance outcomes, whether they be clinical or savings, and that's where we focus. So we do that assessment from the outside. We advise in terms of here's where you're deficient, or here's where you're solid, and here's what we think is the best strategy for you. Because after all, the most important thing is that CEO of any given company, he or she is still in charge. This is their business. We're just giving them the roadmap to expedite and maximize according to the rule of law.
Great. John, hey, I appreciate your time and your information, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful to many executives and small startup companies. And like I said before, it's something that we feel like we need to share with as many people as possible, so that we've just seen it happen so many times when people come up with a very unique test and then they struggle to get reimbursed, and they hire a sales team and they burn through all their cash, and then they're in a dire situation. And so, and obviously our motivation is, we've been in the business for a long time. We want to see companies be successful. We want to add value to you guys, and bringing somebody to the table like John and his team, I think is I know it's a value add for you guys. And so we want you to be successful, and I think this information will certainly help you. We'll have information so you can reach out to John or myself if you need additional information. John, thank you so much for your time today. It's a complex topic that you talked through so easy. I can tell you're an expert in it, and I look forward to continue working with you.
Well, thank you, sir, and you have a great day.
Thanks, John.
All right, take care.
I look forward to continue working with you.